Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are diving into one of the most dramatic periods of Indian history, the 18th century political formation. Imagine an empire that once stretched across almost the whole subcontinent, slowly breaking apart, and in the cracks, both new kingdoms and new dangers emerging. Let's explore how that happened. Now, this map shows the boundaries of the Mughal Empire around 1700. This map shows the Mughal Empire at its peak, just before Aurangzeb's death in 1707. Look how vast it is, from Kashmir to the Deccan, Bengal to the Gujarat. But even within this empire, seeds of autonomy were already growing. Regional powers were asserting themselves. Now, emerging regional forces like Sikhs in Punjab, Jats near Agra and Bharatpur, Marathas in the Deccan, Rajput in Rajasthan, Bengal, Awadh, Hyderabad, Malwa gaining semi-independence. So while the Mughal Empire was still officially the supreme authority, in reality these rulers were carving out their own space. Fast forward a few decades, and you can see how much has changed. The Mughal Empire is now a shadow of its former self-independent. The Mughal Empire is not now a shadow of its former self. Independent kingdoms are no longer hiding their power, they are openly ruling. Strong regional states by mid 18th century like Bengal, Awadh and Hyderabad, Marathas and Rajputs. But here is the real game changer. Look at Bengal. After the Battle of Plassey, which was in 1757, and the Battle of Buxar, which was in 1764, Bengal falls into the hands of the British. From their trading post in the Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta, the British East India Company begins its transformation into a colonial power. This is not just a map of India anymore. It is the beginning of British colonialism in the subcontinent. Now, so what changes happened from 1707 to 1765? 1707, death of Aurangzeb marks the beginning of the Mughal Empire's decline. Now, as there was no powerful king, Mughal central control weakened. Many provinces asserted independence. Now, in the 1765, by this year, the British East India Company had become a dominant political and military force in eastern India. This period saw fragmentation of central authority and the start of colonial dominance. Now the next is the crisis of the empire and the later Mughals. Now let's dive into one of the most important turning points in Indian history, the decline of the Mughal Empire in the 18th century. This is not just history, it is the foundation for understanding how regional powers rose and how the British stepped in. So let's break it down altogether. First is Aurangzeb's Deccan Wars, which was the beginning of the crisis. Imagine pouring water into a pot with a hole. No matter how much you pour, it keeps leaking. That is exactly what happened with Aurangzeb's Deccan campaign. He fought the Marathas for almost 27 years. The Marathas used guerrilla warfare, quick raids, hitting hard and then vanishing into the hills of Western Ghat. Even after their leader Sambhaji's death, they kept resisting. Result, the Mughal Empire's treasury and manpower were drained. Aurangzeb himself died in the Deccan in 1707, leaving behind an exhausted empire. Now, after Aurangzeb, many weak rulers came. Now, emperors like Bahadur Shah I, Jahandar Shah, Farooq Siyar, and the Muhammad Shah Rangila came to power. They spent time in palace intrigues instead of strengthening the empire. The administration became weak, and this gave regional powers the freedom to act independently. Now, rise of nobles and governors. The nobles and provincial governors, meaning subedars, began acting like rulers. They stopped sending revenue to Delhi and started treating their provinces like personal kingdoms. Slowly, the emperor's order became just formality. Now, there were frequent rebellion. When taxes are high, people rebel. Peasants, zamindars, and local chieftains rose up against the empire. Groups like Marathas, Sikhs, and Jats not only revolted but also started carving out independent territories. Earlier, the emperor would have crushed such rebellion quickly, but now the central power was too weak. Now, loss of central control. Think about a machine where the central screw comes loose. Soon the whole machine breaks apart. The emperor was no longer powerful enough to keep provinces together. Regional powers get control over Bengal, Hyderabad, Awadh, and Punjab. The Mughal Empire was no longer a central empire. It became a collection of semi-independent states. Now there were economic and military problems, like with revenues declining, nobles couldn't pay their soldiers. The military became undisciplined and unreliable. Financial collapse weakened both defenses and administration. Now there were also foreign invasion, and it was a time of European entry. Imagine a wounded lion, it becomes easy prey. Delhi was plundered by Nadir Shah in 1739 when he took away the Peacock throne and Kohinoor diamond. Now later Ahmad Shah Abdali attacked multiple times. At the same time, European, especially the British East India Company, were stepping in, taking advantage of the political chaos. The Mughal decline wasn't due to one reason. It was a combination of weak rulers, economic collapse, rebellion, foreign invasion, and the unstoppable Marathas. And this fragmentation opened the door for colonial rule. Here a question is asked, which group of people challenged Mughal authority for the longest time in Aurangzeb's reign? The Marathas were the group that challenged Mughal authority for the longest time during Aurangzeb's reign. Unlike other opponents, the Marathas used guerrilla tactics, struck quickly, and they disappeared into the stronghold in the Western Ghats. Even after losing their leader Sambhaji, they kept fighting back, reclaiming forts and launching raids. Aurangzeb spent decades and enormous resources trying to defeat them, but the Marathas' resistance never stopped. This long-training conflict in the Deccan not only frustrated Aurangzeb but also weakened the Mughal Empire as a whole. Read this passage. In simple terms, the writer is saying that although peasants were still producing good harvest, the nobles who were supposed to collect taxes and maintain order could not actually get their share of the produce. The local agents of these nobles were so powerless that they were at the mercy of the peasants, unable to enforce collection or even secure basic dues. Because the nobles could not collect revenues, they became poor and helpless. Without income from their lands, they could not pay their soldiers and maintain their military forces. This financial collapse meant the nobles lost both economic power and the ability to defend themselves or the empire. As a result, the entire administrative and military structure of the Mughal Empire weakened, contributing to its decline and fragmentation. Now, this paragraph covers a crucial turning point in Indian history, the invasion of Nadir Shah and Ahmad Shah Abdali, alongside the three battles of Panipat, which together highlight how the Mughal Empire lost its strength and how new powers emerged. Now, Nadir Shah invaded in 1739. He was a ruler of Persia and invaded Iran during the reign of Mughal Emperor Muhammad Shah Rangila. He defeated the Mughals at the Battle of Karnal. He entered Delhi and unleashed mass plunder and massacre. He took away enormous wealth including Peacock throne and Kohinoor diamond. He took 17 lakhs in silver rupees crores worth of gold and jewels valued at roughly 50 crore. Now what was the impact of his invasion? Delhi's economy drained and nobles impoverished. Nobility and citizens reduced to beggars, respected figures humiliated. Now Shahjahanabad, which was a new city, and parts of old Delhi were devastated. He shattered the aura of Mughal invincibility and inspired future invaders like Abdali. Now Ahmad Shah Abdali invaded in 1748 to 1761. He was a founder of Durrani Empire in Afghanistan. He invaded 5 times between 1748 to 1761. In first invasion, he repelled at the Battle of Manupur near Sirhind. In the second battle, he captured Lahore and Multan. In the third, Punjab ceded to him by weak Mughal emperor. Now in the fourth, he plundered Delhi and Mathura. In the fifth, it culminated in the third battle of Panipat. Now what was the impact of his invasion? He weakened Mughal authority and ruined North India's economy. He created chaos, famines, and social disruption. He left power vacuum, which enabled the rise of Sikhs, Jats, and Marathas, while giving the British East India Company an upper hand. Now there were three Battle of Panipat. First was in 1526. It was between Babur and Ibrahim Lodi. So outcome was Babur was victorious. He laid the foundation of Mughal Empire. And what is its significance? In this, he used gunpowder and artillery. He ended the Delhi Sultanate. Now, in the second battle of Panipat, which was in 1556, it was between Akbar under Regent Bairam Khan and Hemu. So, outcome was Mughal was victorious. Hemu was executed. And what is the significance? It secured Akbar's throne and re-established Mughal Empire. In the third battle of Panipat, which was in 1761, it was between Ahmad Shah Abdali and Marathas, led by Sadashiv Rao Bahu and Vishwas Rao. So outcome was Abdali defeated Marathas. And what is the significance? It was one of the bloodiest battle of 18th century. It stopped Maratha northward expansion, left a huge power vacuum soon exploited by the British. So why these events matter? Nadir Shah's invasion exposed Mughal weakness. Abdali's invasion deepened political fragmentation. Battles of Panipat marked crucial turning points in power struggle. Together, these devastated Delhi, crippled Mughal prestige, and paved the way for British dominance. During the 18th century, the Mughal Empire was no longer held together by a strong emperor. Instead, the real power was in the hands of the nobles, who were divided into two main groups, the Iranis from Persia and the Turanis from Central Asia. These groups were always fighting each other for more influence at the Mughal court. Because the emperors were weak, they often became puppets controlled by whichever group of noble was stronger at the moment. This meant the emperor had very little real authority, and the decisions were made by the powerful nobles behind the scene. Things got so bad that some emperors were even killed or humiliated by their own nobles. For example, Farrukh Siyar and Alamgir II were assassinated, while Ahmad Shah and Shah Alam II were blinded by the nobles. Blinding an emperor was a way to show total disrespect and to make sure he could never rule effectively again. All this fighting and betrayal among the nobles destroyed any sense of unity in the empire. Instead of working together to strengthen the empire, the nobles were busy fighting each other and using the emperor as a pawn. This chaos made the empire much weaker and allowed regional powers and foreign forces, like the British, to take advantage and gain control. In short, the Mughal Empire fell apart not just because of the outside threats, but also because its own leaders were divided, power hungry, and willing to destroy each other for personal gain. Emergence of new states. Imagine a giant sandcastle at the beach. It stands tall and proud, but as the tide comes in, the castle starts crumbling. People nearby pick up pieces and build their own smaller castles. That is exactly what happened in India after the Mughal Empire began to collapse in the 18th century. Now let's start with the biggest chunk of that sandcastle, that is the old Mughal provinces, which was Awadh, Bengal and Hyderabad. Now Awadh, Bengal and Hyderabad were once strong pillars holding the Mughal Empire. Their governors became powerful enough to rule on their own. But like good sports at a family reunion, they continued to politely say the Mughal emperor was the boss, mainly for prestige, not because of real power. For example, in Awadh, Saadat Khan set up his own power base near the Ayodhya and later at Lucknow. Bengal thrived on trade, especially textile, and Hyderabad under Nizamul Mulk ran its affair independently but kept up the Mughal facade. Let's see one of the old Mughal provinces, that is Hyderabad. Asaf Jahan was a senior noble at the Mughal court, especially powerful during the reign of Emperor Farrukh Siyar. He was the first made governor of Awadh, then given control of Deccan provinces. Now, between 1720 and 1722, as Mughal governor of the Deccan, he gained control over the region's political and financial systems. Taking advantage of the chaos at the Mughal court and conflict among nobles, he made himself the actual ruler of the Deccan. In 1724, he officially established the state of Hyderabad. Now, Asaf Jahan brought administration, a traitor, and soldiers from the North India to help him govern. He appointed Mansabdar, which were military officials, and gave them jagirs. Although he remained a nominal servant of the Mughal emperor, he ruled independently. The emperors only approved decisions already made by him. Now, what was the challenges? Hyderabad was not free from challenges. The state was constantly at odds with the Marathas, who were expanding their influence from the west. At the same time, Asaf Jah had to deal with powerful local chiefs, especially the Telugu warriors leader on the Deccan Plateau. Asaf Jah also aimed to expand his control over the rich textile producing Coromandel coast in the east. However, his ambitions were blocked by the British, who were rapidly increasing their power and influence in that region. Now, this period marks the weakening of Mughal control and the rise of regional powers like Hyderabad, which were technically under the emperor but practically independent. Nizamul Mulk Asaf Jah used his position and the instability of the Mughal Empire to carve out an independent state in Hyderabad. His rise is a key example of how powerful Mughal governors became independent ruler as the central empire weakened. Let's see rise of another independent regional power, that is Awadh. Which is Awadh. Now, Awadh was founded as a powerful regional state by Burhanul Mulk Sadat Khan in 1722. He was appointed as the Sobedar of Awadh, a region known for its fertile land and strategic location along the main trade route connecting North India with Bengal. Now, why Awadh was important? The region was agriculturally rich, making it a source of great revenue. Awadh controlled key trade routes, giving it both economic and military importance. Now, how Sadat Khan consolidated power? He combined all major offices in his hand: governance, finance, and military, which gave him complete control over Awadh. He reduced the influence of Mughal appointed Jagirdars by decreasing their numbers and shrinking their landholding, filling important posts with his own trusted men, auditing Jagirdars' account to prevent corruption and misuse of revenue, reassessing district revenues with local officials to ensure accurate tax collection, confiscating lands from powerful local groups like the Rajput and Afghans, further weakening potential rivals. Now, Sadat Khan introduced some revenue system reforms, like where the right to collect taxes were auctioned to the highest bidder, which is called as Ijaradari system. These Ijaradars, meaning revenue farmers, paid a fixed sum to the state in advance, often with the backing of local bankers and money lenders, meaning Mahajans. In returns, Ijaradars were granted freedom in tax collection, which increased their power and influence. This system brought bankers and money lenders into the political and economic mainstream, marking the rise of new influential social group in Awadh. Now, Awadh became virtually independent of Mughal control with its own strong administration and financial system. The involvement of local bankers and money lenders in governance was a significant change, giving rise to new power center in society. Sadat Khan's reform laid the foundation for Awadh to emerge as one of the most important regional powers in 18th century India. Now, Burhanul Mulk Sadat made Awadh a strong and independent state by reducing Mughal influence, reorganizing administration, and introducing revenue reforms that gave local financial elites a bigger role. This transformation is a key example of how regional powers rose as the Mughal Empire declined. One question which is given here: in trying to consolidate their rule, why did Mughal Subedars also want to control the office of Diwan? Now, the Mughal Subedar wanted to control the office of Diwan to gain full control over revenues and finances, which were essential for running the administration, maintaining power. This helped them reduce interference from the Mughal emperor, became more independent, and consolidated their rule in a time when the central Mughal authority was weakening. Let's explore Bengal's path to independence under Murshid Quli Khan. Murshid Quli Khan was appointed as the deputy, meaning Naib, to the Mughal governor of Bengal, but he quickly took over all the powers that came with the office. Even though he was never formally made the Sobedar, like the rulers of Hyderabad and Awadh, he controlled the revenue administration and gradually reduced Mughal influence in Bengal. Now, key steps taken by Murshid Quli Khan were: he reduced Mughal influence. He transferred Mughal appointed Jagirdars out of Bengal to Orissa, removing their power base from the province. Now, he ordered a strict reassessment of Bengal's revenue and insisted on collecting taxes in cash, not kind. This created pressure on zamindars, many of whom had to borrow money from bankers and money lenders to pay their dues. Now, zamindar who could not pay were forced to sell their lands to a larger zamindars, leading to the consolidation of land in a fewer hands and changing the social structure of the countryside. As in Hyderabad and Awadh, Bengal saw the rise of powerful bankers and merchants. Under Aliwardin Khan, who was Murshid Quli Khan's successor, banking houses like Jagat Seth became extremely wealthy and influential. These bankers lent money to revenue collectors and even received land as security, further increasing their stake in the political and economic system. So, what was the common feature of 18th century regional estate? Now, the new bosses were often ex-Mughal officials but did not fully trust the old ways, especially the Jagirdari system where land was granted for service. They wanted their own trusted people collecting revenue, not distant Jagirdars. Think of it like a new CEO hiring fresh and loyal employees. Now, instead of government agents, tax collection was auctioned off to a highest bidder, called the Ijaradari system or revenue farming. This changed the game. Some tax collectors squeezed the peasant hard to maximize profit. It led to frustration but also changed land ownership pattern, often benefiting landlords and merchants. Imagine selling your shop lease to the highest bidder who charged customer extra to make a profit. Now, wealthy banker and merchants became close partners of the state. They loaned money to tax farmers, took land as security, and sometimes collected taxes themselves via agents. It was a win-win. Rulers got funds, money lenders gained political clout and wealth. These rising elites shaped which way the new states moved, blending commerce with politics. Now, 3 states followed similar patterns, which was Bengal, Awadh, and Hyderabad. They reduced Mughal Jagirdar power, they auctioned tax right, and forging ties with the financiers. This shaped the rise of new regional elites and stronger, if more exploitative, local government. Now let's look at the Watan Jagirs of the Rajput. Now Rajput rulers of Amber, which is in Jaipur, and Jodhpur had long served Mughals and ruled their ancestral land called Watan Jagirs, which was hereditary territories, like loyal landowners. With Mughal decline, these rulers wanted not just to hold but to expand their kingdom. Now key leaders like Ajit Singh of Jodhpur, Savai Jai Singh of Amber, they grabbed nearby territories. Jodhpur took Nagaur, and Jaipur expanded into the Bundi region. But the Marathas said hold on. In the 1740 Maratha invasion into Rajasthan stopped Rajput expansion plan. Rajput then focused on defense and consolidation. Now Rajput chieftains also built many forts. They were more than just military bases. Imagine a massive fortress, your home, office, temple, market, and water supply all in one secure place. So Rajput forts were fortified cities with palaces for rulers and families, temples for daily prayers, trading centers buzzing with commerce, advanced water system like step well, which is Bauli, and the ponds, meaning talab, to survive sieges. For example, Chittorgarh fort had sophisticated water bodies supporting thousands during long siege. So why were forts so important? They were symbol of power, autonomy, and culture. They served as administrative and economic hubs. They helped Rajput resist the pressure of invading armies and turbulent times. In short, the Rajput rulers who once served the Mughal Empire used the decline of Mughal authority to increase their own power and territory. They held important governorship and expand their land, but their growth was eventually checked by the rising power of the Maratha in the mid-18th century. Now let's look at the rise of the Sikh power in Punjab. During the 17th and 18th century, the Sikhs were transformed from a religious community into a strong political and military force in Punjab. This process began under Guru Gobind Sahib, who founded the Khalsa in 1699, a brother of Sikhs committed to defending their faith and fighting oppression. Guru Gobind Singh led the Sikhs in several battles against both Rajput and Mughal rulers. After his death in 1708, Banda Bahadur became the leader of the Khalsa. Under his command, the Sikhs openly rebelled against Mughal ruler, declared their independence by issuing coins in the name of the Guru Nanak and Guru Gobind Singh, and established their own administration in the region between the Satluj and Jamna rivers. However, Banda Bahadur was eventually captured and executed by the Mughals in 1716. Despite this setback, the Sikhs did not disappear. In the 18th century, they are reorganized into small military groups called the Jathas, which later grew into larger confederacy known as the Missals. Together, these groups formed the Dal Khalsa, or the Grand Sikh Army. The Sikhs would gather at Amritsar during the major festivals like Baisakhi and Diwali to make collective decisions known as Gurmatas, meaning resolution of the Guru. Now the Sikhs introduced the Rakhi system, where they provided protection to farmers in exchange for a tax, about 20% of the produce. This helped them win local support and establish their authority in the countryside. Now, inspired by the Guru Gobind Singh's vision, the Khalsa shall rule, meaning Raj Karega Khalsa, the Sikhs continued to resist both Mughal governors and later Ahmad Shah Abdali, who had taken control of Punjab and Sirhind. In 1765, the Sikhs again declared their sovereignty by issuing their own coins, echoing the earlier action of Banda Bahadur. By the late 18th century, Sikh territories stretched from the Indus to the Jamna, but these areas were ruled by different Sikh chiefs. In 1799, Maharaja Ranjit Singh succeeded in uniting these groups and established a powerful Sikh kingdom with Lahore as its capital. Let's look at the rise, expansion, and administration of the Marathas. The Maratha kingdom emerged as a major regional power in western India by opposing Mughal rule. Shivaji was the founder, building a stable kingdom with the help of local warrior families, meaning Deshmukhs, and highly mobile peasant pastoralists, meaning Kunbis, who formed the core of his army. Shivaji's military tactics and local support allowed him to challenge Mughal authority in the Deccan. After Shivaji's death, the real power in the Maratha state shifted to the Peshwas, a family of Chitpavan Brahmin who served as the chief ministers. They made Pune the capital, and under their leadership, the Marathas developed a highly effective military organization. The Marathas were skilled at bypassing Mughal forts, raiding cities, and disrupting Mughal supply lines. Between 1702 and 1761, they expanded rapidly. Malwa and Gujarat were taken from the Mughals in the 1720. By the 1730, the Maratha king was reorganized as the overlord of the Deccan with the right to collect taxes like the Chaut and Sardesh Mukhi. Chaut was a 25% tax collected by the Marathas from non-Marathas territory in return for protection. Sardesh Mukhi was an additional 10% tax claimed as hereditary right. Together, these taxes were a major source of revenue for the Maratha Empire. After raiding Delhi in 1737, Maratha influence spread into Rajasthan, Punjab, Bengal, Odisha, Karnataka, and the Tamil-Telugu region. These areas were not directly ruled but paid tribute, acknowledging Maratha supremacy. While expansion brought wealth and resources, it also made the Marathas many enemies. Other regional rulers became the hostile, did not support the Maratha during the crucial Third Battle of Panipat in 1761, which led to a major setback for Maratha power. Alongside their military campaign, the Marathas set up an effective administrative system. Now, after securing an area, they introduced revenue system suited to local condition, encouraged agriculture, and revived trade. This allowed Maratha chiefs like the Sindhias of Gwalior, Gayakwad of Baroda, and Bhosle of Nagpur to build strong armies. Now, cities like Ujjain and Indore flourished under Maratha patronage, becoming important commercial and cultural centers. New trade routes developed, linking Pune to silk-producing Chanderi and expanding Burhanpur's trade connection. The Marathas rose from regional resistance to become a dominant power in the 18th century India. Their military skills, administrative reforms, and support for trade and agriculture helped them build a strong state. However, their rapid expansion also created many enemies, which ultimately limited their ability to maintain a unified empire. Next is the Jats. The Jats, originally prosperous agriculture communities in the regions around Delhi, Agra, and Mathura, began consolidating their power in the late 17th and 18th centuries. Their rise was Mughal oppressions and heavy taxation, which led to several revolts against Mughal authority. Under the leadership of Churaman, the Jats gained control over territories west of Delhi and by the 1680 started dominating the area between Delhi and Agra. Towns like Panipat and Ballabgarh flourished as trading centers under their rule, reflecting their agricultural prosperity and growing economic influence. Now Jats established their independent kingdom at Bharatpur, with Surajmal emerging as their most prominent ruler. Surajmal expanded the kingdom by capturing important Mughal territories such as Agra, Mathura, and parts of Aligarh. At its peak, the kingdom stretched from Ganga in the east to the Chambal in the south, including regions of present-day Rajasthan, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, and parts of Delhi. Now, Surajmal was known for his military skills and administrative abilities. He maintained a large, well-organized army and successfully defended Bharatpur against invasion by the Mughals, Marathas, even the British. His son Jawahir Singh commanded a formidable force, hiring Marathas and 6 troops to strengthen his position against the Mughal. The Jats built impressive forts and palaces, most notably the Lohagarh fort in Bharatpur, renowned for its strength and ability to withstand repeated British attacks. At Dig, they constructed a grand garden palace that blended architectural style from Amber and Agra, inspired by Mughal royal design. Now, after Surajmal's death in 1763, the Jat state faced internal dispute and external pressure, especially from the British. Eventually, Bharatpur became a princely state under the British control in the 19th century. So the Jat transitioned from being prosperous farmer to powerful rulers, like taking advantage of Mughal decline. Under leaders like Churaman and Surajmal, they built a strong, independent state centered at Bharatpur, expanded their territories, developed trade, and left a legacy of impressive forts and palaces. Their rise significantly weakened Mughal authority in northern India and contributed to broader pattern of regional state formation in 18th century. While regional powers were rising in India, France was ruled by Louis XV, engaged in costly European and colonial war, lost much of his overseas empire to Britain, and faced growing internal resistance and financial crisis. These developments weakened the monarchy and paved the way for French Revolution at the end of 18th century. Now let's match this carefully since the pairs are jumbled. Now Subedar was a provincial governor. Faujdar was a Mughal military commander. Now Ijaradar was a revenue farmer. Misal was a band of Sikh warrior. Now Chaunt is a tax levied by the Marathas. Now Kunbiz, Maratha peasant warrior. Now Umara was a high noble. Now this section I think you should try to do on your own because many of them have been covered in this and this has been covered in the chapter. Now the next is state true or false. First is Nadir Shah invaded Bengal, which is false. Nadir Shah invaded northern India and famously sacked Delhi in 1739. There is no historical record of him invading Bengal. The Marathas invaded Bengal multiple times in the mid-18th century, but not Nadir Shah. Next is Savai. Raja Jai Singh was the ruler of Indore, which is false. He was a ruler of Amber, which is a present-day Jaipur, Rajasthan. He was a prominent Rajput ruler, also served as a governor in several Mughal provinces, but was not associated with Indore. Third is Guru Gobind Singh was the 10th Guru of the Sikhs. Now Guru Gobind Singh was indeed the 10th Guru of Sikhs and was the last human Sikh Guru. He established the Khalsa in 1699. Now next is Pune became the capital of Marathas in the 18th century. Now Pune served as the capital of the Maratha Empire in the 18th century, especially under the Peshwas who were de facto rulers, meaning this statement is true. Now the next is the offices held by Saadat Khan. Saadat Khan, also known as Burhanul Mulk, held 3 important combined offices in the province of Awadh. Subedari, he was the governor responsible for political administration of Awadh. Diwani managed the financial affair. Faujdari controlled the military and the law enforcement functions in the province. Next is why did the Nawab of Awadh and Bengal try to do away with the Jagirdari system? So first, let's discuss what was the Jagirdari system. Imagine a system where landowners called Jagirdars got big chunks of land and right to collect taxes from peasants in return for military service or loyalty. But over time, these Jagirdars became like mini kings. They collected taxes through their own agents and often ignored their rulers. Jagirdars often acted independently, corruptly, and sometimes ruthlessly, leaving peasants overburdened and the Nawabs with unpredictable revenues. Nawab found themselves like bosses who could not control their middle managers. They could not trust Jagirdar to deliver money regularly. Nawab like Saadat Khan wanted to take back control. Instead of handing land to Jagirdars, they auctioned tax collection right to the highest bidder, called the Ijaradari or revenue farming system. This way, the state got a fixed amount upfront, making finances more stable. Also, loyal officials replaced the powerful Jagirdars, strengthening the Nawab's hold. So, what changed? The role of Jagirdars faded, and new revenue farmers became important players. Though peasants sometimes suffered more, the state became richer and stronger. The Nawab could now focus on building their own kingdom without Jagirdari interference. Next question is, how were the Sikhs organized in the 18th century? In the 18th century, the Sikhs were organized in a highly effective and flexible way that allowed them to resist the Mughals and later invaders like Ahmad Shah Abdali. Here is how they structured. First is Jathas. Initially, Sikhs organized themselves into small armed bands called Jathas. These were the groups of warriors who operated independently but shared common religious and political goals. Now, misls. Over time, these Jathas merged and reorganized into later confederacies called misls. Each misl controlled a specific territory in Punjab. There were about 12 to 25 such misls, each led by a chief. They operated semi-independently but came together for common military campaign. The combined force of all the misls were known as the Dal Khalsa, the Grand Sikh Army. It acted as a united military and religious force. The Dal Khalsa held meetings called Sarbat Khalsa twice a year during festivals like Baisakhi and Diwali to take collective decisions known as Gurmatas or resolution. Now, Rakhi system. The misls introduced a protection system called Rakhi, where Sikhs offered protection to cultivators and village in exchange for a tax. This helped strengthen their control over territories and built loyalty among the people. Now, after the death of Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Sikh Guru who established the Khalsa in 1699, the Sikhs under leaders like Banda Bahadur and later the Misl Sardar became a strong military political community. The Misl effectively resisted Mughal governors and Afghan invaders, laying the foundation for the Sikh empire that was eventually unified under Maharaja Ranjit Singh in the early 19th century. Next is, why did Marathas want to expand beyond the Deccan? Now, the Maratha wanted to expand beyond the Deccan in the 18th century for several important reasons. The weakening Mughal Empire left a power vacuum in the northern and central India. The Marathas saw this as an opportunity to assert their dominance and claim political authority across a larger part of India. Under leaders like Peshwa Bajirao I, the Marathas aimed to transform from regional Deccan rulers into a pan-Indian empire controlling key territories beyond their base in Maharashtra. Now, expanding into prosperous regions like Malwa, Gujarat, Punjab, and the Doab region meant access to richer resources, trade routes, and revenue, which were vital for sustaining a strong army and administration. Controlling northern India would provide strategic depth, safeguarding against invasions, and enable the Marathas to check rival powers such as Afghans, Rajput, and Nawab of Awadh and Bengal. Inspired by earlier leaders like Shivaji and propelled by dynamic Peshwas such as Bajirao I, the Marathas embraced expansion as a policy to unite fractured Indian territories under their rule. By controlling more territory, the Marathas could expand their taxation system, including Chauth and Sardeshmukhi, strengthening their fiscal base. Next is, what were the policies adopted by Asaf Jahan to strengthen his position? Now, in 1724, Asaf Jahan defeated Mughal governor Mubaris Khan and established his autonomous rule over the Deccan region, marking the beginning of the Asaf Jahan dynasty. Though he acknowledged nominal Mughal sovereignty, he ruled independently in practice. Asaf Jahan combined the important offices of Subedari, Diwani, and Faujdari in his own hand, centralizing power and control over the Deccan. He appointed trusted nobles, meaning Mansabdar, and granted Jagirs to loyal officers to ensure effective administration and military support. He collected taxes through well-organized channels, often involving bankers, and revenue farmers to stabilize state finance and reduce corruption. He strengthened his army to defend his territory against the rising power of the Marathas and other rivals. He actively fought the Marathas to check their expansion in the Deccan, including controlling levies and raids in the Carnatic region. He used strategic diplomacy such as mediating Maratha dispute, for like backing Sambhaji II of Kolhapur against Sahu I, and treaties to consolidate his influence and weaken opponents. Though practically independent, Asaf Jah continued to show loyalty to the Mughal emperor symbolically, such as keeping the Mughal flag and mentioning the emperor's name in Friday prayers to legitimize his rule. Now next is, do you think merchant and bankers today have the kind of influence they had in 18th century? Now merchant and bankers in the 18th century held direct political and fiscal power by financing state and controlling revenue. Today, their influence is more institutional, regulated, and global, affecting government and economies indirectly through market, lobbying, and investment. Both periods show the importance of economic actor in shaping politics and society, but the nature of their influence has evolved with the changing system. Now in the next video, we will start with the new book, Class 8 NCERT History. Thank you.